Welcome back. In this session, we will be thinking more about developing your ability to learn better. In particular, we focus on a key strategy for boosting memory and deepening learning. This is spacing. At first, it might seem that this strategy is counterintuitive, but try it and you won't regret it. The first stage in memory is encoding. Think of encoding as putting things into a filing cabinet. The second stage is storage. And the third is retrieval or extracting the stored information. Ranga, any other thoughts?
When we first place something into memory, we remember it for only a short time. We don't store information for the long term unless it's reused and repeated. The more it is repeated, the longer we store it. Scientists have shown repeated use of information and skills with gaps between repetitions leads to activating processes in key neurons in the brain.
Funman, believe it or not, researchers for many years have studied the learning and memory of a very interesting subject, the honeybee. Bees have to fly all around to look for nectar, and then they have to figure out, how do I get home to their colony?
Wow, that means that their brain must be really tiny, Bob. So how do they best learn?
Researchers taught honeybees to associate nectar with different colors. One group of honeybees were taught with sessions that were spaced with gaps of 30 seconds. Another group of honeybees was taught with sessions with 3-minute gaps, and then the final group had 10 minutes between sessions. All the honeybees were then tested after 30 minutes, and then 1 day later, and then after 3 days. What they found was that honeybees trained with the 30-second gap showed the greatest learning at the 30-minute time period. However, when they were tested on the third day, their memory had dropped to only 20%. In contrast, honeybees trained with 10-minute gaps showed less retention after 30 minutes, but subsequently had the best long-term retention at 3 days.
Wow, that's fascinating, Bob. So when honeybees learning happens all at once, is it the long term as presenting information repeatedly without any gaps? It shows the importance of having an interval between stimuli. So Ranga, what does this study tell us?
This study shows a very interesting principle that learning or programming the brain is more effective the greater the interval between sessions. In other words, if you learn with small gaps between study sessions, you will forget more quickly. It's likely you need time for consolidation of memory to occur, and very short time intervals do not allow this consolidation to happen.
This effect is called the spacing effect, and it has been known for a very long time. The various pieces of new information get stored by modifying existing knowledge in neural circuits distributed throughout the brain. Unfortunately, most people don't use the spacing effect. They study by repeating the materials over only a short period of time. Cramming for exam is very typical. However, this type of repetition isn't very effective for long-term learning. Bob?
Here's another time waster. If 2 pieces of information are learned over the same amount of time, but one is spread over either a very short interval, like cramming, or the other over a longer time interval, they are remembered quite differently. Quite simply, you could spend the same amount of time learning, but spacing shapes how long we remember.
One critical point to consider is that spacing may not produce an effect unless there are more than 2 or 3 repetitions. This is especially critical when difficult, lengthy, or technical learning materials needs to be learned. Let's face it, when there's a lot to learn, or when the learning material is complex, learners will need more repetitions. However, more effort equals more learning. So, what's the right spacing interval? Let's say you want to remember for a long term or for an exam that's still very long time ahead. What should be the best interval for spacing?
A recent large study showed the optimal interval between study sessions should be 10 to 30% of the time before a test. So everyone, imagine that your final exam is 10 weeks away. If you want to remember material from the first week of class on the final exam, you should return to it again 2 to 3 weeks after you first studied it, and then again at the same interval until close to the exam.
If you want to know the optimal distribution of your study time, you need to decide how long you want to remember something. If you want to remember it for life, then you should study the material again at least a year after your first exposure.
Thanks, Ranga. Let's revisit the key points. For long-term retention, planned gaps between learning sessions are more effective than short-term cramming. Wider gaps between sessions are generally more effective than narrow gaps. Consider how you are going to space your learning, formulate a plan, and make it part of your learning routine. Now, it's over to you.
Join us again for our next session when we explore interleaving, another strategy that will help you learn to learn better.